Feeling like a shark in a shrimp tank. Big fish, small pond in the shrimp tank.
Hey, everybody. Welcome to this episode of The Shrimp Tank. I'm your co-host, Ted Jenkins, here with my co-host, Lee Heisman. For those of you that have not tuned into The Shrimp Tank before, we do some of these on Zooms with CEOs all across the country. But every week, what we've tried to do for the last 7 years is bring you some of the brightest and best owners, entrepreneurs, and CEOs in and around the city of Atlanta and across the United States, because people want to know, how do I get a combination of book smarts and street smarts? How can I start a business, grow a business, and run it successfully? And maybe one day I exit it as well. And I will tell you what, the following that we've had have been amazing. So make sure that you go to the YouTube page, Shrimp Tank Podcast, and absolutely subscribe. Hit the notifications bell so you get all those videos in your mailbox. And you can always go to any of the major channels, Apple Podcasts, Google Play, Stitcher, SoundCloud, iHeartRadio, or Spotify to download the podcast. Of course, check out recent podcasts we did with Dr. Michael Breus. Did I say Michael Breus?
It is Michael Breus.
Michael Breus, the #1 sleep doctor in the country. Tony Horton, founder of P90X. Brian Dawkins, Hall of Fame safety for the Eagles, and many, many more entrepreneurs. And we're excited today to have on our guest, Josh Hatter. He is the owner of a growing segment today that maybe a lot of you haven't thought about. He runs Coastal Vacation Properties, but he's in the bed and breakfast space, Lee, in real estate. And there are so many different real estate models that are out there. We want to hear about how this works as a business. Because, Lee, I have to tell you, I don't think there's a week that goes by now where somebody doesn't say to me, do you think I should be buying real estate? Do you think was it just the pandemic that created this? Or did people always love real estate?
By the way, every time that you say that and use that example, when someone does address you about it, do they use that same intonation and accent?
Yeah,
that you
every
threw
single
out?
time.
Okay, I'm just making sure.
Yeah.
It's it.
Anywhere that I'm at, people pull me aside, and that's what they say.
They talk to you like this. Is that the way
They talk to me a little Jersey, a little Philly, a little
That's
New
what I was
York, a
thinking.
little Cleveland, a little Boston. I got it all in me at this point.
Fair.
Shout out to Brian Dawkins, right, with a Philly.
Yes, Brian. You know, Josh, I'll tell you on a side note for Brian, great friend of mine and great friend of the studio. Of course, Brian, you know, people don't realize for our audience out there's only 185 active NFL Hall of Famers, about 250 total, and I think 185 that are alive and kicking on this earth today. You don't think it's such a small number, but when you get into that class of people, Ted and I had the fortune of Brian coming up and spending 3 days with us at our studio up here in Atlanta. And you just get to learn. It's amazing because you watch the passion of what he did in his football career when he applies it. And we just texted each other the other day. He might not know certain areas of the business world that we were going into, but you can see his dedication to trying to figure it out. And that's why he was so successful in the field. So and you can appreciate this, Josh. Ted and I have had the fortune of interviewing people like that, and now yourself, and we get to be inspired every day. So Josh, no pressure, but we're going to ask some questions, and we need you to inspire us like an NFL Hall of Famer.
I'll do my best.
Yeah, so talk to us in here because I think, you know, maybe over the last 5 years, really, this whole notion of Airbnb, VBRO, you know, everybody out there thinking that they're going to get a beach property or a mountain property. We've seen in the commercial side big growth in public storage, but you've got a new model now where you're building boutique bed and breakfast. So walk us through what that is and what you're building out.
Sure. Yes. Thanks for having me. First of all, I appreciate it. And thanks everybody for listening. Time's the one commodity that we can't replace, can't buy it. So if you're spending your time listening to us, thank you for that. It's been an interesting ride. I kind of a joke. I've been in the short-term rental game really since 2012. And kind of my running joke is when I started that in 2012, that was really long before the proliferation of Airbnb. And, my old college buddies would literally laugh in my face. Right. And so, kind of believe in that model. And now here we are in 2023, 11 years later. And you really have to, it's almost like a re-education, like, no, Airbnb got its name from something. There's this thing, an actual bed and breakfast, right? So it's an interesting model. And really, I would not want to go through COVID again. But frankly, COVID can probably be attributed to some of the growth in the space. So the bed and breakfast always was an asset class, but you basically have kind of two models. So you have your hospitality group that owns a bunch of these B&B / boutique hotel assets. And then you've got your owner operators, and those are typically, maybe an older husband and wife, and they actually make the breakfast every single morning themselves. They meet the guests, they hand them their physical key, right? So kind of a little old school in terms of the hotel experience, and certainly old school in terms of the short-term rental experience. Short-term rental kind of skipped all of that. And really there's been a whole technology ecosystem forming around it for the last 15 years. So kind of the working model on the B&B concept is, in a post-COVID environment, people want something that's kind of experience forward, technology forward, design forward. They don't want the physical key. They want it just like if they were to go to a hotel, either have a key card or a code that works only during their stay. And they don't necessarily need to talk to somebody, right? So we kind of use the avatar of a Trader Joe's shopper, right? So, typically instead of your 50 to 70, like you might have seen pre-COVID for the bed and breakfast segment, we're more so looking at like the 28 to 40-ish, 45-ish segment. Not that we wouldn't welcome anybody outside of that, but in terms of the technology forward model, that's really the kind of segment that we're shooting for in this asset class that we're building now.
And Josh, does this look like a traditional? I remember years ago up in Bar Harbor, Maine, when I stayed, or my first, and Boothbay Harbor, I stayed in both of them. My first kind of bed and breakfast, and I had that experience. Is this going to be reminiscent of the original bed and breakfast, where there might be 6 or 8 rooms, and you get that smell of bacon and eggs in the morning to come down for breakfast? Is that what this will look like?
So it's our first 2 assets are 9 keys each. We're kind of, trying to move up the value chain a little bit and look in the 12 to 20 range now. We don't want to go any bigger than maybe 75 or so, but yeah, so certainly much smaller than your normal hotel in terms of the number of keys that you're looking at. And yeah, especially I'm in Charleston, South Carolina, in an old historic city like this. You've got a bunch of really historic buildings. They're very restricted with what you can do with those. So it makes for a good experience, kind of the history of the building with modern amenities, we like to say.
So I like the way you reference it. Instead of guests, you say keys.
Yes.
Right. So you have 7 keys here, 8 keys here. There was a recent upsurge in a TV show. I don't know if you've watched it, called White Lotus, right, on HBO.
Yeah,
Everybody's watching it. And it was an amazing idea, Josh, because if you consider, you forget when you travel to a location or a property for a week at a time, you do develop your own ecosystem, right? And the show just capitalized on all these interactions over the course of a week. I lean into that because I'm thinking, in the bed and breakfast world, are people staying for 3, 4, 5 days? And is everybody really independent? It would seem as though you'd have to create a small little mini community and mini timed community. How important is that for your guest stays?
Totally, yeah. It's interesting. People will come and they'll sit in the little dining room together, right? And they kind of talk like, "Well, what are you doing today?" And kind of share their own little travel tips. But yeah, I mean, we want to. So that's the difference, really, between short-term rentals and this asset class. It's a little bit more hands-on, more labor-intensive. Certainly, my last couple of employees, we've been lucky enough to hire away from higher-end hotels here in Charleston. So more of that kind of upper echelon hospitality experience is what we're leaning toward, as we kind of, as investors anyway, move away from short-term rentals. My management company, CBP, certainly manages short-term rentals and will continue to do so for the foreseeable future. But as an investor, there's a lot more opportunity and a lot more upside in this asset class than there is, in my opinion, in short-term rentals. And really, that's just 10 years ago, like I said, you had to explain it. And now, between the Fed's zero interest rate policy and just rising asset prices, those returns have been tremendously compressed. So kind of shifting from one asset class to another.
Talk to me about this term you used of modern amenities, because Lee and I are the kind of guys that we want to have a gym at a hotel, which often you would not find at a bed and breakfast. Rooms today are really covered up in technology today, from the lighting systems to the television. How will you go about transforming the homes with these modern technologies? And then how does that play into the return on investment and where you set room rates?
Yeah, absolutely. So it's been interesting. I think so. We bought our first two assets last year, looking for our next couple now. So it's been a fun experience. But I think really little things like the key codes, right? I mean, literally the one we closed in mid-December was still handing out physical keys. So doing the remote lock thing or something similar. Schlage has their own brand as well too. There's a lot of folks that are doing this now, but you can set codes that are just active during a guest stay, which obviously from a safety and liability perspective is paramount. So that's a no-brainer. Little things like these old houses typically will have central air conditioning, but if you're in a 9-key bed and breakfast, that's not helpful to you if there's only a couple of thermostats, right? So we'll do mini splits as well in each room, and that way there's kind of a baseline temperature. Everybody has their own individual preferences, but they can control that within their room, which you typically won't see in an asset class like this. We also, instead of doing the full sit down breakfast, we actually partnered with a local company. I'm a huge fan of trying to contribute to the local business ecosystem wherever possible, and they bring our breakfast menu by every morning, 8 o'clock, and turn on the heater, and we let breakfast run for a couple of hours after that. And so people are welcome to still sit at the table and chat with their neighbors. And some folks, if they're in town for work, maybe they have an appointment or something, they just kind of grab their breakfast sandwich and go. But yeah, and then in terms of modern amenities, so I mean, we literally replaced all the guts of this one that we're reopening on March 18th as our first grand reopening. Put about $700,000 into it. All new kitchens, I'm sorry, all new bathrooms, one new kitchen. There is a suite that has a full kitchen. And then also things like HVAC, the AC and the plumbing, all completely been redone. The term we use affectionately is grandma's house, right? And certainly not being disparaging, but you got the old kind of like doily curtains and 4-poster beds and most of these B&Bs. And so trying to get a little bit more modern with our aesthetic. So brought a designer in to handle that as well.
Did the designer want to remove the plastic on the couches, or did they choose to keep that aesthetic?
Yeah, I don't think we kept a stitch of furniture actually. So
fair.
Yeah, I mean, from top to bottom. Yeah. So the things that we keep, obviously in these historic houses, you have the old fireplaces, the old crown molding, right? So those things kind of get restored. But in terms of the actual aesthetic and the look and feel, it's much more what you're used to seeing in a hotel.
Well, and Josh, real quick, going in, I'm looking forward to it. My wife has been wanting to make a trip to your city, so I already now have a contact. So this is great. But the way you're talking about it, I can foresee how the new relaunch is going to work. It's going to be wonderful, but no one really sees behind the Oz's great curtain of how challenging it is. And you said, we brought a lot of people from high-end hotels. In today's world, we know how difficult it is the past few years of bringing in quality talent and keeping it. It's next to impossible. Then you have the food and hospitality industry, which is even a harder industry to find quality people with. Can you speak to that? Because I cannot imagine the nightmare. You're making such an investment financially. It seems as though from what you're describing, it's going to be first class, but just the talent pool. How have you struggled with this, and what are your plans today and going forward?
Yeah, it's that's a great question. So I'm 41. This is easily the tightest labor market I've ever seen in my professional career. It's insane. Despite the kind of macro shaky economic ground that we're on, the labor market just continually persists in being super tight. So I feel like as we've scaled my management company a bit, I've tried to be a lot more selective with who I hire. That continues to get harder and harder as we move along here. Fortunately, in the early days, as I'm sure you guys both know, you kind of almost have to convince somebody, right? Like this is a good idea. This is a stable company, and we're well past that mark now. So in terms of like employee referrals, you got a really great employee, and they can kind of talk to their friends about it. And in fact, the last person we hired actually worked for one of our other employees at their previous job. So you really have to do a sales job in the early part of a company, and hopefully once you get past that and create an environment that employees really like working, then, they're talking more to their friends and the hiring becomes a little bit easier. I'd much more rather take a chance on a referral with somebody that we think is a great employee than kind of just go into a bunch of 20 blind interviews and pick the best out of the lot there. But yeah, I'm a big, who, not how guy, right? So, really looking at what exactly do we need at this specific point in the company's growth process and looking for that specific person, and not just saying, okay, well, they check half of the boxes, let's give it a shot. I would rather, kick that can down the road and make sure we find somebody that's, 85, 90% fitting the mold of exactly what the company needs for that specific phase of the growth life cycle than anything else. But it's tough. I mean, there's I think still hospitality workers that haven't gone back to work, since COVID. So
Ted, I have to make a comment, Josh, when you said that. It struck me for the first time when you said you're 41, I'm 51, he's 62. And
holy crap. Anyway, you guys are drinking.
Ted is 53. He's 53, but I'm 51. And I will tell you, I agree with you, but I have to make a comment for our listeners out there. Josh is right. This is the tightest labor market I know we've seen in the past few decades. Here's the main difference. And tell me, and Ted, you can chime in and Josh chime in. For listeners out there that have businesses, entrepreneurs, entrepreneurs, this labor market's different for this main reason. Josh is right. It is tight. But before, when we had a tight labor market, it was because someone else was offering somebody more money. And then you had to determine money and benefits. These days, it isn't that I have to offer you money. I have to actually convince you to actually want to come to work. Mm-hmm. So sometimes I feel that this labor market is tight, not just from a financial perspective, but a desire to actually go to work. Do you agree with that?
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. And certainly not trying to get political, but if that was an experiment for universal basic income, I think we'd know how that went, right? I mean, it's tough to get people back to work now after a couple of years. So and you don't, if I have to convince you to do it, do I really want to hire you?
Exactly,
but at the same time, how do you grow without it? Right. So it's
sounds like my conversation with my wife once or twice a week, but I still convince her nonetheless.
I hear you. Yeah, I hear you. I mean, it's been a tough go. Yeah. And I think I would say the last maybe 6 months or so have been better for us. But I also feel like, just the momentum we have in building this brand has also kind of turned a corner too. And that just makes a huge difference when you're trying to hire folks.
You mentioned something in the beginning, which I think is interesting for entrepreneurs as a whole that may be watching this video today, which is the term avatar. And when people start a business, I own a marketing agency, and it was, I think people forget about that. I don't know if you're calling it, Breakfast Betty or whatever the may be, but a lot of people use alliteration when they build out an avatar. Can you talk about that? Because I think a lot of entrepreneurs make a mistake by not building an avatar or two for their business. And then they go out, they try to sell a product, they price it out with ever really having thought about that avatar. Do you mind talking about that?
Sure. Yeah, absolutely. I can probably attribute that. So the third partner we brought in on number 2 is also buying into number 1. Adam Whitty has his own marketing company, Advantage Media. So he's
did you say Adam Whitty?
Adam Whitty.
Wait, I know. I got to interrupt this, guys. I got to interrupt this.
I love it.
So a good friend of mine, I belong to a group called the Oxford Center, Cliff Oxford. Adam actually purchased it with Forbes. I met Adam twice. Hear me out. Ted, you're going to be blown away. I met Adam twice. Somehow, Josh, I think my big mouth makes me memorable. About a year and a half later, hear me out. A year and a half later, I'm in Iceland. Iceland, for my brother-in-law's wedding to an Icelandic girl. I'm in a hotel with my wife. A guy yells across the room, "Excuse me, I looked you up on is that Lee Heisman?" And it's Adam Whitty and his fiance at that time. And Adam was like, "Lee, I looked you up." And I'm like, "Adam, I don't remember." "Oh my gosh, I remember you." Randomly in Iceland. I met him twice when he purchased the Oxford Center. What a first-class gentleman. I think he was getting married at that time. So make sure.
They have a baby now, actually. They've got a 1-year-old. So.
I remember. I had to comment.
It's hard to miss him. He's like 6'5".
Yeah, so make sure, if you don't mind, Adam Whitty, if you're listening to this, I need to see you again. Josh, I'm hoping you reference us.
I'm actually really happy that. So I try to name. I've got 2 partners. Cameron O'Connor is the other, and I try to name those guys, or at least one of them.
So do
when
me a
I'm-
favor, Josh, when you see Adam next, say, hey, I just met a guy you met in Iceland. Just
I
end
will.
it there and then
I
see if he
will.
figures it out. If he figures it out.
I totally. I'll shoot you a line later. So we, the three of us talk like it's constant, right? Because we're kind of
good. You got to. Very good.
we're in that. And I couldn't agree with you more. I mean, I hear these partnership horror stories, and I just not a thing for me, right? I mean, I am so grateful for these two men that are in my life. Not just great businessmen, but great husbands, great fathers. I mean, they're people you want to be around. I am incredibly grateful that I'm on this journey with these two guys.
I messed up the question. Ted and you were talking. I heard Adam Whitty. I had to interrupt the randomness. I'm so sorry about that.
I got it, the customer avatar though. So this is totally we've named our brand the True V collection. True V is French for a lucky find. And so that's kind of the direction that we're headed. But yeah, as we've kind of onboarded Adam here with these are the conversations that we've had. And so quite literally sitting with his marketing team, on a Zoom call, half the folks in person and half on the phone, and just, what's your target average daily rate? And, what does the person look like? And I use the Trader Joe's moniker because I think when we finally got to the very end of the exercise, that's kind of what it looked like, right? That age range, it is generally women that wind up looking for hotel rooms and booking them on behalf of their families, generally more educated and that kind of like, maybe $80,000, $100,000 to $150,000 income demographic. So I mean, I agree with, frankly, I wish I had done that exercise when I started this stuff out. At the time, I think I was probably just trying to figure out how to keep guests happy. But we've totally, gotten off on the right foot, Adam. So, the consummate professional as we kind of go through this branding exercise. But I encourage, I have a small mastermind group of mine now and got a husband and wife that are starting their own management company. And same thing, like, well, what's your customer avatar, right? And if I ever hear of anybody starting a business, I will have them go through that exercise. It's incredibly helpful. And it also helps you say no. So as you are, moving along in this entrepreneurship journey, if the wrong person crosses your path and you have identified what this avatar looks like, and this potential client is too different than that avatar, it kind of helps you pivot a little bit. So super worthwhile exercise, highly recommend for anybody.
So let me ask you a question, because what's interesting is that since COVID, I have coined the term a couple of years ago of that idea of revenge travel, that people are back out and traveling again. But a lot of families are traveling, but they really want to figure out how to get like one big house together. Is part of this model potentially to fill what I would consider to be the gap of like who's going to be in what room and how's it going to work in the big house? And instead you've got a bed and breakfast with 9 keys. So you could have a bunch of families basically have their own rooms, have all the amenities, but it's still all in one big house.
Sure. Yeah. So part of it, Charleston, South Carolina, #2 wedding destination behind Vegas. So I don't think we'll ever overtake that, but I'm not sure that we want to. So, people come here just to get married. That's a huge piece of the direction that we're headed, which to your point, you're not just creating common space that can be used for maybe a rehearsal dinner, but also outdoor space, another area to congregate. And if somebody wants to rent the entire property, that just kind of makes it easier for the wedding party. I would say in terms of families, so there definitely was a massive rate surge coming out of COVID. I would say 21, 22, 23 is probably closer to flat. The people that are really getting hit now, if you've seen like the hashtag Airbnb bust, the people that were earlier in the asset class, like I had the pleasure of being, if you didn't, this is not an asset class you don't reinvest in, right? It's not just constant value extraction. You've got to put more money into it, or you can't compete with the new properties that are coming online that are beautiful and Instagrammable. And so, those are the people, if you see the meme tweets going out, oh, my rates are down 30, 40%. It's typically that demographic that has.
Did your model have to change at all when interest rates jumped from 3 to 6% here, either in the way you buy properties or how you did room rates?
No, I mean, so it's interesting. I think my banker loves when I say this because it's generally a question that comes about. There's so much opportunity in this new asset class that we're buying, and kind of my running joke is if it was if it's a bad deal for you now just because interest rates have effectively doubled over the last year, then your deal was always a bad deal, right? Like I'm never looking to invest where the margin of safety is just a couple of interest rate points, because there's nothing that you can do to impact where we are in that cycle. And frankly, we got really lucky that it was close to zero as long as it was. So, that's why we had the inflating asset prices for so long. I definitely have seen the investor market slow down. The people that are still buying are the ones that have cash or a 1031 tax exchange to do. Right. But yeah, that's not a thing for us. I mean, we buy with a much larger margin of safety than that.
Yeah, I love that. I love that mentality. I feel kind of the same way. If you're going to do something right, bet on yourself. The few percentage points shouldn't affect you that much. So completely subscribe. And I know as we're wrapping up, I got one important one for you, Josh. I can tell you're in tune with yourself. You're very strategic in your thought process. Things you do are very mapped out. It's clear to see that. But I've got to ask an entrepreneurial question as we wrap this up. I've got to ask my go-to, which is in the past 5 to 10 years, as you've grown these businesses, and a lot of our entrepreneurs, they're listening to you thinking, oh, look at him. It's so easy for him. He just seems to be making the right choices and he knows exactly what to do. But I'd like to know one of the biggest mistakes that you had done and what you learned from it.
Absolutely. Yeah.
And you didn't even hesitate. I love the speed at which you're ready to answer that.
No, that's, I live my life like an open book. And so when that's the case, I'm at the point, I just want to help other people. Right. And so when that's the case, it just makes it easier, especially the difficult questions, because I think those are the ones I'm most proud of, right? But I think entrepreneurship really changes your definition of failure. Not to go down a rabbit hole of the school system in this country, but failure is not encouraged, right? You're playing to a grading system. You've seen this grade inflation over the last 50, 70 years, but failure is not encouraged. As entrepreneurs, if we don't fail, we're doing something wrong. We're not trying hard enough. If we're not failing, trying something new, someone else is out there doing that. And whatever that is may completely replace what our business is, right? And so I'm always trying new technology platforms, new vendors. You have to kind of constantly be outside of your comfort box. And so, I think for me as an entrepreneur, we're always trying those things. I like to joke, as far as technology solutions or process solutions, if we can come up with like a 50 or 60% solution out of the gate, we can work it to an 85 or 90. Now, I will say in terms of failure, that does not apply to human capital, especially the earlier on you are in a business. If you make a wrong hiring decision, it can crush your business.
So what was yours, Josh? What was your?
I definitely made a couple of bad hires that I probably in hindsight would not have done. And I mean, it cost you not just money, but the most important thing, as I mentioned before, is time, right? And, especially when you're early on, and 6 months to a year could be like half of your company's life cycle at that point. And so I made a couple of hiring errors that I wish I could have back. Fortunately, I think I've been right a lot bigger than I've been wrong. And they're just very grateful so far in the marriage game, and then also the partnership game with Adam and Cam.
So far, he says.
Well, we only got married in October, so.
Congratulations.
Crushing it so far, but like I say, it's 3 or 4 months.
They're crushing the honeymoon phase, Ted. They're
crushing the honeymoon phase. Yeah. I feel like that's a low bar, so I don't want to take too much credit.
But celebrate the victories.
Absolutely. Right. That's part of being an entrepreneur too.
I want to ask Lee, just in general, there are a lot of people investing in all kinds of real estate. And I know with your businesses, you've done lots of different shapes and sizes. What would you give people as far as the biggest advice if they're thinking about getting into any kind of rental real estate? Any big ahas or mistakes that they could run into?
I think the biggest thing in terms of real estate, just general real estate as an asset class, it's really hard to lose money if you are able to look back and zoom out at a 50-year view of real estate in any section of real estate, right? And so the biggest thing is you don't want to ever put yourself in a position where you're forced to sell at a timing that doesn't work for you or doesn't work for your numbers. If you're able to hold long enough, you're never going to lose money. if you're able to go back to like '08, right? And things may be taking a hit, COVID. I mean, if you can zoom out long enough, you're always going to make money. So I would say margin of safety. And then frankly, finding smart people that are willing to teach you. I mean, I all anybody can say is no. And I wish I would have reached outside of my comfort zone a little bit earlier and try to ask some folks, with the books I was reading, questions. You'd be surprised what kind of response you get, I think.
So for folks that want to stay at one of your now new bed and breakfasts of this new concept, which is really exciting, where can they go to do that? Sure.
So our website is Stay CVP. That's CVP as in Coastal Vacation Properties. So staycvp.com. And you can also look at the individual property listings on the Ashley CHS, the AshleyCHS.com, and 1837BB as in bed and breakfast, 1837BB.com. And additionally, if anybody wants to reach out, I'm always happy to have a conversation. People can actually book time with me on my website. It's just joshhatter.com. Would love to chat with folks as well if they want to reach out.
Well, congratulations on your success. I mean, we love nothing better than interview entrepreneurs that are breaking new ground. I don't think I've seen this concept. I've seen bed and breakfast, but not like a modern technology type or a modern amenity type concept in the B&B space. So again, it's staycvp.com or 1837bb.com. Folks, you got to check this out. This is what we talk about every week. Couldn't agree with Josh more. You want to support your local business owners. I mean, you could stay at any kind of hotel chain, but maybe stay at one of Josh's bed and breakfast concepts. Check it out. Share it with your friends. This is how we make the merry-go-round, because it's guys like Lee and myself and Josh that are hiring Americans out there. It's not the Fortune 500 companies. You're seeing more than ever that they're laying off people all across the United States, while people like us are out there using our own money and our own time to go grow our local marketplaces. So Josh, thanks so much for doing this. Folks, you can check this out. We'll put it up on YouTube. We'll put it up on shrimptankpodcast.com. Of course, make sure, as I mentioned in the beginning, that you download us and check out any of the cities that we have in Charleston or Boca Raton or Seattle or anywhere around the country, while we tell the stories of entrepreneurs out there and how people are changing America day by day. And Josh, thanks for your part in doing that. And this is a final wrap up here for this week's episode of the Shrimp Tank.
I've been feeling like a shark in a shrimp tank. Big fish, small pond in the shrimp tank.